The building had 41 floors. Maravas knew this because she had counted them once, standing on the pavement outside in the October cold, neck tilted back, eyes tracing the steel and glass all the way up to where the top edge dissolved into low gray cloud. She had counted them the way a person counts things when they are trying to delay a decision they have already made. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 41. And then she had walked inside anyway. That was 3 weeks ago. Tonight she was back, except tonight she had not come alone. Lily sat in the lobby chair, with her small legs dangling 6 inches above the floor, her winter coat buttoned wrong, one side higher than the other, and her eyes moving slowly around the marble atrium, the way eyes move when a mind is cataloging everything it sees and filing it somewhere deep and permanent. She had her backpack in her lap. She always had her backpack. It went with her the way a shell goes with a snail, not out of fashion or habit, but out of something close to instinct. "You're going to wait right here," Mara told her, crouching down to be level with her face. "Right in this chair. You don't move. You don't talk to anyone. You don't go anywhere," Lily finished. Her voice was flat in the way that 7-year-olds' voices go flat when they've heard an instruction enough times to have it memorized like a nursery rhyme. "I know, Mara. I'm serious. You're always serious." Mara held her sister's gaze for a moment. Lily looked back at her with those pale, still eyes. Their mother's eyes, everyone always said, and everyone was right, and did not blink. There was no anxiety in her expression, no fear. This was perhaps the most alarming thing about Lily. She was not frightened of things that should have frightened her. She had sat in emergency waiting rooms at midnight and not cried. She had watched a man threaten Mara in a parking garage 2 years ago and had simply stood there, memorizing his face. When Mara had asked her later if she'd been scared, Lily had considered the question for a long moment before saying, "No, but I was angry. 7 years old." Mara didn't know where she'd gotten her. 30 minutes, Mara said. "I'll be back in 30 minutes. She stood, checked her coat pocket for the folded envelope she'd carried for 9 days without opening because she couldn't make herself open it, and crossed the lobby to the elevator bank. The lobby attendant was not at his desk. This was unusual, but Mara didn't stop to consider it. She had one thought, and it occupied the entirety of her mind. The 15th floor, Suite 1507, the office of Dr. Renata Solis, who had treated Lily for 11 months before abruptly transferring her file to a colleague without explanation, and who had left behind, according to the colleague, a supplementary assessment that had never been forwarded. A document that apparently contained a notation, just a notation, 3 lines in her clinical file, that could qualify Lily for a state assistance program that would cover 60% of her remaining treatment costs. 60%. Mara had done the arithmetic so many times the numbers had lost their meaning. She did it again now, in the elevator, watching the numbers climb. She was not doing it to calculate. She was doing it to keep from thinking about what it would mean if the document wasn't there. The elevator opened on 15. She found Suite 1507 dark, which she had expected. She found the door unlocked, which she had not. She stood in the doorway for a moment, one hand on the frame, listening. The corridor was empty. The building, at 9:40 on a Wednesday evening, held the specific silence of a place that has exhaled its last worker and is now simply waiting. The kind of silence that has texture, that has weight. She went inside. Dr. Solis's office was small and impersonal, the way offices become when their occupants have mentally moved on before. They physically have. The desk was partially cleared. The bookshelves held gaps where volumes had been removed. The filing cabinet behind the desk was the only thing that still looked inhabited. 4 drawers, each one labeled in Solis's precise block lettering, the labels so evenly spaced they looked machine printed. Mara found the drawer she needed. She opened it. She began to search. She was careful. She moved each folder with 2 fingers, reading the tab labels, replacing each one exactly as she found it. She was not stealing. She needed to be precise about that inside her own mind, because it mattered to her even if it wouldn't have mattered to anyone watching. She was not stealing. She was looking for a document that belonged to her sister, that concerned her sister's health, that had been misfiled or withheld or simply forgotten by a woman who had moved on to other patients and other problems and other lives. She found the file. She opened it. She was reading, standing. It was in the near dark, with the drawer still open and the folder held in both hands. when she heard the sound, not from the corridor, from the private door on the far wall, the one she'd assumed was a closet. It opened, and Lily walked in. Mara stopped breathing. Lily looked at her with an expression that was somehow entirely reasonable, as if she had followed a logical sequence of events to a logical conclusion and had arrived precisely where she expected to arrive. She had her backpack on both shoulders. Her coat was still buttoned wrong. "I found the stairs," she said. "Lily." Mara's voice came out in a register she didn't entirely recognize. "What did I tell you?" "You told me not to go anywhere." Lily looked around the office with this slow, cataloging gaze that Mara knew by now to dread slightly. "I didn't go anywhere. I came here." "That is going somewhere. It's going to you. That's different." Mara closed the folder. She closed the drawer. She crossed the room in 4 steps and crouched down again and took Lily by both shoulders very gently and said, "How did you get up here? The stairs and the private stairwell. That door should be—" "The lady with the gray cardigan showed me." "What lady?" "The one at the desk by the back. She said she recognized me." Lily's eyes had moved to the filing cabinet. She had that look again, the cataloging one. "She said I look like someone." Mara didn't have time to untangle this. "We need to go, right now. Come on." "Why does it say Ash on the door?" Mara stopped. She turned slowly and looked at the private door Lily had come through. She hadn't noticed it before. The light was wrong. But now she could see it clearly. Mounted at eye level in the same architectural steel lettering that ran throughout the building signage. A single word. A SH, not soulless, not sweet. 1507. She looked at the room again, looked at it properly for the first time. The desk was not partially cleared. It was entirely different from the Zurich desk she thought she remembered. The bookshelves were not gapped, and they were full. The filing cabinet she had opened was not in a small, impersonal office. It was in a large one, with a view she hadn't registered because she'd had her back to the windows. Floor to ceiling, the lights of the city below, arranged in the cold geometric order of a world that did not care who was watching it from above. The folder in her hand, she looked down at it. She had been so focused on the tab and on the familiar format of the label, the same block lettering, that she had not read what it actually said. Her eyes had found the shape of the thing she was looking for, and her brain had confirmed it before she had properly checked. She read it now. The name on the folder was not Lily's name. Her hands had gone very cold. "Mara." Lily's voice had changed, just slightly. It held something Mara had almost never heard in it: caution. Lily was looking at the door that led to the corridor, not the private. The door she'd come through. The other one. "Someone's coming." Mara heard it too. Not footsteps exactly. Something more controlled than footsteps. The sound of a person who moves through spaces as though the spaces belong to them, which is a different sound entirely from the way ordinary people move through spaces that happen to be unoccupied. She had 3 seconds, maybe 4. She put the folder back. She did not have time to think about whether she returned it to the right position. She closed the drawer. She stepped away from the cabinet. She reached for Lily's hand and found it already reaching for hers, their fingers interlocking with the wordless fluency of 2 people who have navigated emergencies together before. They were standing in the center of the room holding hands when the door opened. He did not turn the light on immediately. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just a moment, the length of a single breath. And in that moment, with only the city light coming, through the windows behind Mara and Lily, she could not see his face clearly. She could see his height, his stillness, the way he occupied the frame of the door without leaning on it or gripping it, simply standing in it with the ease of a man who has never needed a threshold to make him feel solid. Then he reached to the side and the overhead lights came on, and he looked at them. He looked at Mara first, a slow, precise assessment, the kind that takes in everything from the envelope-shaped bulk in the coat pocket to the tension in the jaw to the position of the feet, which were, Mara realized, pointed toward the filing cabinet she had just closed rather than toward the door, which was where innocent feet would have been pointed. Then he looked at Lily, and something happened to his face. It was not a dramatic thing. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was so small that Mara almost missed it, and she would think about it later alone, turning it over and over in her mind, trying to name it. Something around the eyes, a loosening, as though a muscle he'd held taut for a very long time had involuntarily released. Lily looked back at him. She did not step behind Mara. She did not grip Mara's hand harder. She stood exactly where she had been standing at Mara's side and looked up at him with those pale, still unfrightened eyes, and said, in the tone she used for observations rather than questions, "You're the one whose name is on the door." The silence that followed was enormous. Mara's heart was doing something architectural to her rib cage. She was calculating exits, calculating words, calculating whether the truth, or a lie, or silence was the correct instrument for this precise situation. She was calculating all of it and arriving at nothing because there was nothing to arrive at. She was in this man's office at 9:40 on a Wednesday evening with a 7-year-old child and a folder she had touched that she should not have touched. And the man was looking at her sister with an expression she could not name. He said nothing for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even and unhurried, the way the voices of people who never have to raise them tend to be. He said, "Who gave you permission to be in here?" He was not looking at Mara when he said it. He was still looking at Lily. And Lily, without a flicker of hesitation, without a trace of the fear that Mara was currently experiencing on behalf of both of them, tilted her head slightly to the left, like she always tilted it left when she was thinking, and said, "Nobody. But nobody gave you permission to have all this space either, and you still have it." The silence returned. Mara stopped breathing entirely, and then, so quietly, so briefly, so completely at odds with everything the room and the man and the moment had suggested was possible, something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Not quite not a smile. He looked at Mara then. Unnerving than any of those things. It was something far more unnerving than any of those things. It was interest. "Sit down," he said. And then, as though the word had surprised even him, "Please." Neither of them sat. He didn't seem to expect them to. He moved to his desk and unhurried, deliberate, and set down the leather case he'd been carrying, and stood behind the chair without sitting in it either, one hand resting on its back, and regarded them both. "You were at the filing cabinet," he said to Mara. It was not a question. "I was," she said. He waited. She understood, in that moment, the precise mechanism of his power. He didn't press. He didn't threaten. He simply created space, careful, deliberate space, and waited to see what you would put in it, what you would volunteer, what the pressure of his attention would draw out of you. She decided not to fill it. She looked back at him and said nothing. Something shifted in his expression, something that might, in a different face, have been approval. Lily, who had been looking between the two of them the way she watched things she was trying to understand, said, "She was looking for my file. The doctor moved offices and left something behind, and Mara has been trying to get it for 9 days, and the people at the hospital keep telling her to come back, and she's run out of time." "Lily," Mara said quietly. "It's true," Lily said with perfect serenity. The man behind the desk looked at the child for a long moment. Then he looked at Mara. "Wrong floor," he said. "Yes," Mara said. "Wrong office." "Yes." "Wrong filing cabinet." A pause. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, then, "What's in the envelope in your pocket?" Mara's hand moved involuntarily to her coat. She stopped it. "That's not your concern." Another small silence. This one different from the others, denser. "No," he said finally. "I suppose it isn't." He picked up his phone from the desk, not to call someone. Simply held it, turned it face down, set it aside again, a gesture she didn't understand yet. "The doctor who left something behind," he said. "Solis." Mara looked at him. "You know her." "This is my building," he said simply. "I know everyone who works in it." He paused. "And I know what she left. I know because my assistant flagged a misfiled document 3 days ago and was waiting for instructions on where to forward it." The room tilted slightly beneath Mara's feet. Not literally, but something shifted in the atmosphere, in the weight and arrangement of everything she had believed about the last 9 days. She said, "Where is it?" He said, "That depends." "On what?" He looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at Lily. Then back at Mara, and something in his face had settled into an expression she still couldn't fully read. But it was not hostile, and it was not cold, and it was not the thing she had prepared herself. For when she'd heard the door open and understood that the ground beneath this particular evening had just dropped away. On whether you'd like to sit down, he said, and tell me what's in the envelope. If this story has already pulled you somewhere you didn't expect to go, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Stay with it. Mara sat down. She hadn't planned to. Her body made the decision before her mind could override it. A slow, reluctant descent into the chair across from his desk. The kind of sitting that is not comfort but surrender to the simple fact that her legs had been carrying the weight of 9 days without sleep and were no longer willing to pretend otherwise. Lily sat beside her, immediately, as though she'd been waiting for permission, and the moment Mara moved, the question was settled. She placed her backpack on her lap, folded her hands over it, and looked at Dorian Ashe with the patient, unblinking attention she gave to things she had decided were worth understanding. He sat too, finally, behind the desk. He did not open a laptop or reach for a pen or perform any of the small administrative gestures people use to establish authority in the rooms they already own. He simply sat and looked at Mara and waited. The envelope had been in her coat pocket for 9 days. She had carried it through hospital corridors and across wet pavements and into the narrow kitchen of the apartment she shared with Lily, where she set it on the counter some mornings and stared at it while the kettle boiled, and then put it back in her pocket without opening it. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment. She told herself she needed to be somewhere stable, somewhere quiet, somewhere she could absorb whatever it contained without Lily in the next room asking questions with those still, pale eyes. The truth, which she had not admitted to herself until this precise moment, sitting across from a stranger in an office she had not been invited into, was that she was afraid of it, not of what it said. She already knew approximately what it said. She was afraid of what it would require of her once the words were official, once they were real in the way that only written things are real, because spoken things can be misheard and remembered wrong, but written things simply are. She took it out. She set it on the desk between them. She did not push it toward him. She set it in a neutral space, equidistant, and looked at it rather than at him. My mother died in February, she said. 11 months ago. She had a cardiac event. She was 53. She paused. Before she died, she told me that Lily's father, not my father, a different man, had a hereditary condition. A specific one. She said she'd never had Lily tested because she didn't want to know. She said she was sorry she was telling me this now, at the end when she couldn't help with it. She said she was sorry for a lot of things. The room was very quiet. Lily tested in March. The results came back in April. The envelope is the specialist's follow-up assessment. She looked up from the envelope and met his eyes. I know what it says. The specialist told me in person. The envelope is just the official version. The one I need for the assistance application. What does it say? He said, not a question, not quite. The tone of a man who asks because he has assessed the situation and determined that you need to say it out loud more than he needs to hear it. Mara understood this distantly and resented it slightly and told him anyway. It says she has a progressive neuromuscular condition, early stage, manageable if treated consistently and early. The specialist said when she stopped, restarted. The specialist said the children who receive proper intervention at this stage often lead full, largely unaffected lives. She said the window matters, that the next 18 months are the window. Lily was looking at the far wall, not blankly, thoughtfully. She had heard this before clearly. She had the expression of someone listening to a familiar piece of music. Present, but already past the part where it surprises you. And the assistance program, Dorian said, covers the bulk of the treatment if I can prove she qualifies. The qualification notation is in the document Dr. Solis left behind. Without it, I reapply from the beginning, which takes 4 to 6 months, which eats into the window. Mara's voice was even. She had made it even deliberately. The way you make something level by pressing down on it. I've been asking the hospital to locate the document for 9 days. I was told it had been transferred, then I was told it hadn't, then I was told to come back. Then I was told the system was being updated, then you came here yourself. Then I came here myself. He was quiet for a moment. His eyes had moved to Lily again. And Mara watched him look at her the way she'd watched him look at her in the doorway, with that small involuntary softening that he seemed unaware of, or at least uninterested in concealing. "You said she looks like someone," Mara said carefully. "The woman who led her up. She told Lily she looked like someone." Something changed in his posture, barely perceptible. A kind of stillness that is different from ordinary stillness, the way a held breath is different from a breathing pause. "Mrs. Callum," he said. "She's worked the back desk for 12 years." A beat. "She has a long memory." "Who does Lily look like?" He looked at Mara then, directly, and the expression on his face was one she recognized because she wore it herself sometimes in the kitchen in the morning before Lily woke up. The expression of a person who has carried a loss for long enough that it has become structural. Part of the architecture of the face. Not grief anymore, exactly. Something past grief. Something quieter and more permanent. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he said, "How old is she?" "7. She'll be 8 in March." He nodded once, slowly. "The document my assistant flagged," he said. "I'll have it located tonight. You'll have a copy by morning." Mara stared at him. "You'll have the original forwarded to the assistance program directly," he continued, "which will move faster than a personal submission. I have a contact at the administrative office. It will be processed within the week." The silence that followed was a different kind entirely from the silences that had preceded it. Those had been weighted with tension, with assessment, with the careful architecture of two people deciding how much to trust. This one was weighted with something Mara had not felt in so long that it took her a moment to identify it. Relief. Actual relief. The physical variety. The kind that moves through the body like a slow exhale after a very long held breath. Loosening things that have been braced for so long they'd forgotten they were bracing. She didn't let it show. Or she tried not to. She wasn't sure she succeeded. "Why?" she said. He raised an eyebrow, a fraction of a centimeter. "Why would you do that?" she said. "You don't know us. We were in your office without permission, going through your files. You could have called security 20 minutes ago." "I could have," he agreed. "So why didn't you? Why are you—" She gestured slightly at the space between them, at the conversation, at the entirely improbable shape of the last half hour. "Why is any of this happening?" He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Because she isn't afraid of me." Mara looked at him. "People are generally afraid of me," he said. It was not boastful. It was stated with the flat, unsentimental accuracy of a man describing a weather pattern. "It's useful mostly. Sometimes it isn't." He glanced at Lily. "She walked through that door and looked at me the way people look at furniture. Something to be assessed for its function and its placement, not its power." Lily, who had apparently been listening while appearing to study the far wall, said without turning her head, "Furniture can still hurt you if you walk into it. I was being careful." Something moved across Dorian Ash's face. That same thing from the doorway. Myra still couldn't name it precisely. It lived in the territory between recognition and pain. He stood. He crossed to the private door, the one Lily had come through, and opened it and spoke briefly and quietly to someone on the other side. Mara caught 2 words, document and solace. Then he returned to the desk. He did not sit again. "Felix will find what you need," he said. "It'll take 20 minutes. You can wait, or you can leave an address and I'll have it sent." "We'll wait," Lily said. Mara looked at her. "It's fine," Lily said with absolute composure. "He's not going to hurt us." "You don't know that," Mara said quietly. "Yes, I do." Lily set her backpack on the floor, a gesture of settlement, of intention. "He has a photograph on the shelf behind his desk. 3rd one from the left. It's a little girl. She's younger than me. He keeps it facing his chair, not the door, which means it's for him to see, not for visitors." She finally looked at Dorian directly. "How long ago did she die?" The room went absolutely still. Mara felt the question land the way a stone lands in deep water. Not a splash, but a slow, heavy descent. The ripples moving outward in silence. Dorian Ash looked at the child for a very long time. His face had done something she had no name for at all. It had opened slightly, just at the edges. The way a room opens when someone unlocks a window that has been painted shut for years. Not wide, not dramatic, just enough to feel the difference in the air. 5 years ago, he said. His voice was exactly the same as it had been, low, even unhurried, except that it cost him something now. Mara could hear the cost of it, the way you hear effort beneath a calm surface. Lily nodded, as though this confirmed something she had already calculated. I'm sorry, she said, simply, without performance. The way children sometimes apologize for things that are not their fault and that no apology can touch, because they have not yet learned that some losses are supposed to be left alone. Dorian looked at her for another long moment. Then he looked at Mara, and Mara looked back at him and understood, with a clarity that arrived without warning and without comfort, that they were not going to leave this building tonight and return to their ordinary lives unchanged. That something had already shifted, was still shifting slowly, the way tectonic things shift, beneath the surface without asking permission. She didn't know yet what it meant. She knew it meant something. 20 minutes, she said. He nodded. She settled back into the chair. Lily had already unzipped her backpack and taken out a small battered book. She always had a book. And opened it to a page she'd marked with a torn corner of receipt paper. She began to read with the focused private serenity of a child who is entirely comfortable in spaces she has not been invited into. Dorian Ashe watched her for a moment. Then he sat down, opened the leather case he'd brought in, and began to work. The three of them existed in the same silence. Different silences, layered, each one belonging to a different kind of grief and a different kind of waiting, while the city moved 40 floors below them, indifferent and vast and entirely unaware that something small and irreversible had just begun. Felix was not what Mara had expected. She had built a picture of him in the 20 minutes they waited, assembled from the sparse materials available, the way Dorian had spoken to him through the door, brief and low, with the compressed efficiency of two people who have worked together long enough that full sentences are a luxury neither requires. She had imagined someone large, someone with the specific blankness of men who are paid to be present rather than to think. Felix was slight, middle-aged, with reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead and a manila folder held in both hands with the careful reverence of someone delivering something fragile. He knocked once before entering, which she noticed because it suggested that the door belonged to Dorian, but the courtesy belonged to Felix, and that this was a distinction he had decided to maintain regardless of circumstance. He looked at Mara, then at Lily, then at Dorian, with an expression that asked several questions simultaneously while asking none of them out loud. Dorian said, "The folder." Felix crossed the room and placed it on the desk. He did not leave. He stood slightly to the left of the door with his hands clasped in front of him, which was either the posture of a man awaiting further instruction or the posture of a man who had decided he needed to witness whatever happened next. Dorian opened the folder. He looked at its contents for a moment and long enough to read, not long enough to deliberate, and then turned it and slid it across the desk toward Mara. She looked down at it. It was 3 pages. The first was Dr. Solis's letterhead, the date from 8 weeks ago. The clinical language she had already heard translated in his plain speech by a specialist sitting across a desk from her in a small office that smelled of coffee and disinfectant. The second page was the assessment addendum. The third was the qualification notation. 3 lines, as she had been told. Precise, unambiguous, exactly what the assistance program required. 3 lines that had been sitting in a misfiled folder in this building for 8 weeks while she had spent 9 days being told to come back. She did not cry. She had not cried since February, since the hospital corridor outside her mother's room, and she was not going to start now in a stranger's office with Lily 3 feet away. But something happened behind her eyes, a pressure, a heat, the physical sensation of something that wanted to be a different kind of feeling and was being firmly declined. She looked up. Dorian was watching her. Not intrusively, the way you watch someone cross difficult terrain. With attention, not voyeurism, ready to say something if something needed to be said, and prepared to say nothing if nothing did. "This is what you needed," he said. "Yes." "Felix will make copies tonight. The original goes to the program office first thing tomorrow. He'll hand-deliver it." He glanced at Felix, who nodded once, the nod of a man adding an item to a list he keeps entirely in his head. "You'll receive confirmation within 48 hours. Mara looked at him for a long moment. "You're doing this," she said slowly, without knowing anything about us, without any reason to. I have reasons. What reasons? He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, considering. The way people consider when they are deciding not how much to reveal, but how precisely to say the true thing. My daughter's name was Clara, he said. She was 3 when she died. An illness, the treatable kind, theoretically, except that by the time it was caught, it had stopped being treatable. A pause, each word placed carefully. The way you place weight on ice, you're not certain will hold. There was a window. We missed it by 11 weeks. 11 weeks because a document was delayed, because a specialist was on leave, because the system moves the way systems move, and it's slowly and without caring what is lost in the slowness. The room held very still around his voice. I know what a window is, he said. I know what it costs to miss one. Lily had lowered her book. She was looking at him with an expression Mara had seen before, had seen it in the hospital, had seen it in the social worker's office, had seen it in every room where adults said true and heavy things in her presence, and then looked at her with the vague, guilty surprise of people who had forgotten she was there. It was not a child's expression. It was the expression of someone who has been trusted with difficult things often enough that they have learned how to hold them. I'm sorry about Clara, Lily said, for the second time. But differently from the first, as the first had been instinctive, immediate, this one was deliberate, weighted, the kind of sorry that no, it cannot fix anything and says itself anyway because silence would be worse. Dorian looked at her. She would have been 9, he said, in April. Lily nodded. She reopened her book, not dismissively, but with the tact of a child who understands that some people need to be looked away from after they have said something true. She looked down at the page. Whether she was reading, Mara couldn't tell. Felix, near the door, had developed a sudden and intense interest in the middle distance. Mara folded the document carefully, not the fold of someone handling paper, but the fold of someone handling something that has cost a great deal and taken a long time to arrive, and placed it in the envelope she'd carried for 9 days, the envelope that had held something else entirely and now held this. She put it back in her coat pocket. I don't know how to thank you, she said. She said it plainly, without the decorative helplessness people sometimes dress the phrase in. It was a statement of fact she didn't know. The normal instruments of gratitude, words, gestures, reciprocity, were all absurdly inadequate to the specific shape of what he had done. You don't need to, he said. I'd like to. When Lily's program is approved and when things are more. She stopped, tried again. I work at St. Anselm's, filing, nights. It's not, I don't have resources, but if there's something I can do. He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize. The one that priested silence. The one that meant he was deciding something. There is one thing, he said. She waited. Tell me your name. Your full name. I know the girls. Lily told me. I don't know yours. It was such a simple thing. So unexpectedly simple that it almost undid the composure she'd been holding in place for the last hour. She had been braced for something complex, something that carried weight or obligation. He had asked her name. Mara, she said. Mara Voss. He repeated it, not out loud, just the movement of it silently, as though placing it somewhere. Dorian, he said. And then, because it seemed to be a thing he was offering rather than a thing he was accustomed to giving, Ash. I know, she said. It's on the door. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. That same, almost thing from the doorway. Felix coughed quietly. Not from illness, from the specific diplomatic throat clearing of a man who has observed something he thinks is significant and is removing himself from it tactfully while remaining in the room. Dorian looked at him. The copies. Of course. Felix took the folder from the desk with the same careful reverence and moved toward the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. Miss Voss. He said it to Mara, with a small nod that managed to be both professional and warm, the nod of a man who has worked for a long time in a world without much warmth, and has therefore learned to value it in small doses when it appears. Then he left. Mara stood, Lily, as though connected to her by some invisible current, stood at the same moment, backpack already on both shoulders. "We should go," Mara said. Dorian stood too. He came around the desk, not toward her, not encroaching, simply moving to the near side of it, as though closing some portion of the formal distance the furniture had imposed. He was taller than she'd registered from across the room. He had the bearing of a man who has never needed to make himself larger because he has never doubted his own size. "The lobby attendant will call you a car," he said. "It's late." "We're fine. We take the bus. At 10:30. We've done it before." He looked at her for a moment, not pressing, not insisting, something else. The look of a man encountering a specific kind of stubbornness that he recognizes because it resembles something he sees in his own mirror and is not entirely sure whether to respect or argue with. "Then Felix will walk you to the stop," he said. She opened her mouth. "This isn't negotiable," he said quietly, without edge. The tone of a man who has said this before and has never had to repeat himself twice. "It's 10:30 and you have a child. Felix walks you to the stop." Lily looked up at Mara with an expression that said, very clearly without words, "Let him. Mara, let him." She moved toward the corridor door. Lily followed. At the threshold, Mara stopped. Not because she'd planned to, but because something pulled at her. Some unfinished thing. Some sentence she hadn't said that the room seemed to require. She turned back. Dorian Ashe was standing where she'd left him, one hand resting on the near edge of his desk, watching them go with an expression she finally had a name for. It was the expression of a man watching something return to the world that he had believed for 5 years was gone from it permanently. Not Lily specifically. Not her face or her eyes or the particular way she held her backpack like a shell. Something she carried. Something that had walked into his office without permission and sat down with a book and said, "I'm sorry about Clara," the way you say it when you mean it, which is differently from every other way it gets said. "Good night," Mara said. "Good night, Mara Voss," he said. Lily paused beside her, looked back at him one more time. "She would have liked me," Lily said, not unkindly, with the calm, factual certainty she brought to all her observations. "Clara, I think she would have." She didn't wait for him to answer. She walked into the corridor, and Mara, after one more moment in the doorway, followed her, back into the fluorescent ordinariness of the hallway, back toward the elevator and the lobby and the cold October street below, carrying an envelope that now held something real, something official, something that meant the window was still open. Behind them, in the office with the city laid out 40 floors below, Dorian Ashe stood very still for a long time and did not turn the light off. "If you're still here, good. The most important part is still coming." 3 weeks passed. Mara did not think about Dorian Ashe every day. She thought about him on the days when the ordinary machinery of her life ground loudly enough to remind her that it had briefly stopped. The days when the assistance program's confirmation letter sat on the kitchen counter and she passed it 12 times without picking it up because picking it up meant accepting that it was real, and accepting that it was real meant accepting that a stranger in a 41-floor building had done in one evening what 9 days of correct procedure had failed to do. She thought about him on those days, and then she put the thought somewhere practical and went to work. Lily's first covered treatment appointment was on a Tuesday. Mara took the morning off, which cost her, and sat in the waiting room of the specialist's office with a paper cup of bad coffee and a 3-month-old magazine and did not read a single word of it. When Lily came out, she said the doctor had nice hands and that the equipment smelled like a swimming pool and that she was hungry. They went to the place on Caldwell Street that did egg sandwiches and sat across from each other in a window booth, and Lily ate with the focused appetite of a child who has just been through something mildly unpleasant and is rewarding herself efficiently. "You're doing the face," Lily said, without looking up from her sandwich. "What face?" "The one where you're thinking about something you've decided not to think about." Mara drank her coffee. "I don't have a face like that." "You have several faces like that," Lily said. "This is the second one. The first one is when you're thinking about Mum. The second one is newer." Mara set her cup down. "Eat your sandwich." Lily ate her sandwich. But she looked up once, briefly, with those pale, still eyes, and the look said everything she had chosen for once not to say out loud. The second time Mara went to the building on Aldgate Street, she did not intend to go to the building on Aldgate Street. She was passing it. This was true. Her route from the night bus to St. Anselm's took her along Aldgate on Thursdays, had always taken her along Aldgate, long before she had any reason to look up at the 41st floor and register that the light in the corner office was still on at 11:15 at night. She had walked this route for 2 years. The building had always been there. She stopped because the door was open. Not the main entrance. The side door. The one that led to the service corridor. It was propped open with a rubber wedge, and through it came the sound of raised voices. Not violent, administrative, the tight, pressurized sound of a disagreement that has been ongoing long enough to have calcified into something neither party can step back from. She recognized one of the voices. She stood on the pavement for a moment in the cold, with her work bag on her shoulder and the sensible portion of her mind telling her clearly and specifically to keep walking. She went inside. The service corridor led to a small loading area and from there to a secondary reception space that was used apparently for deliveries and late staff access. Mrs. Callum was behind the desk, gray cardigan, long memory, and across from her stood a man Mara didn't recognize. Broad, expensively dressed, with the particular energy of someone accustomed to being agreed with and currently being refused. He was holding a folder. He was telling Mrs. Kellum, in the tone of someone explaining arithmetic to a person they consider slow, that he had authorization to access the 38th floor records room and that he needed the after-hours key and that her insistence on protocol was frankly an embarrassment to the building. Mrs. Callum was looking at him the way very small, very old women sometimes look at very large, very loud men, with an expression of such complete and total unimpressiveness that it functioned in its own quiet way as a form of devastation. The key, she said, requires Mr. Ash's authorization. In writing, after hours, I have verbal authorization. In writing, Mrs. Callum said again, identically, as though she had not heard him, which they both knew was not the case. Mara had stopped in the corridor entrance. The man noticed her before she could decide what to do about having noticed him. He turned, assessed her in a single efficient glance. Work bag, hospital, lanyard still clipped to her coat, unremarkable, and dismissed her with the same efficiency. He turned back to Mrs. Callum. Call him. Call Ash right now and get me written authorization. Mr. Ash is in a meeting. Then interrupt it. Mr. Ash, said Mrs. Callum with the serenity of a woman who has weathered decades of men exactly like this one, does not get interrupted. The man set the folder on the desk. He leaned forward, and something in his posture changed, not dramatically, but in the way that postures change when a person has decided to stop performing patience and start performing something else. Mara said, "Is there a problem?" Both of them looked at her. She had not planned to say it. It had come out of the same instinct that had made her walk inside. Something that operated below the level of strategy and was not particularly interested in her considered opinion. The man looked at her with the renewed attention of someone recalibrating. "This doesn't concern you." "You're right," she said, "but you're leaning over a desk at a woman who told you no twice, and I find that difficult to walk past." A silence. Mrs. Callum looked at Mara with an expression of quiet, composed recognition, as though something she had suspected at their first meeting had just been confirmed. The man straightened. He picked up his folder. He looked at Mara for a moment longer. The look of a man storing information rather than reacting to it, which was, she realized with a cold shift in her stomach, more unsettling than anger would have been. "Tell Ash," he said to Mrs. Callum, "that Renner came by." He left through the side door. The rubber wedge scraped against the floor as it swung shut behind him. Mrs. Callum looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Mara. "Miss Voss," she said warmly, as though Mara had arrived for an appointment rather than wandered in off the street at 11:15 on a Thursday night. "I was passing," Mara said, which was true and also entirely insufficient as an explanation, and they both knew it. Of course, Mrs. Callum had already picked up her phone, not to call security, to call upstairs. She dialed a single number, waited 2 seconds, and said, "Miss Voss is here." A pause. "Yes." She set the phone down and looked at Mara with a small, composed smile. He'll be down in a moment. You didn't need to, Mara started. He'll be down in a moment, Mrs. Callum said again, in the tone of a woman who has made a decision and considers the matter settled. Mara stood in the small reception space and waited and told herself she was only staying because it would be rude to leave after Mrs. Callum had already called up, which was true, but was not the whole truth, and she knew it. Dorian came down in 4 minutes, not the elevator, the internal staircase, which meant he'd moved quickly, which she registered and then deliberately stopped registering because it meant something she wasn't ready to examine. He looked, the same. Controlled, architectural, wearing the particular stillness she had come to think of as his natural state rather than a practiced one. He looked at her and then at Mrs. Callum, and something passed between them wordlessly. Renner, Mrs. Callum said. Something shifted in his expression, briefly. What did he want? 38, after hours key. Did he give a reason? Authorization, he said, verbal. Dorian was quiet for a moment, then he looked at Mara. You saw him. I was passing, she said. For the second time, it sounded less convincing than the first. You came inside. He was leaning over the desk. He looked at her for a long moment, the assessing look, the one she remembered from the first night, except that something in it had changed. It was less guarded, not unguarded, less. Come upstairs, he said. I have work. I'm on nights. I have to be at St. Anselm's by midnight. It's 11:20. Come upstairs for 10 minutes and tell me exactly what you saw. She went upstairs. The office was the same. City below, photograph on the shelf. She looked at it this time, the third one from the left. A small girl with dark hair and an expression of total absorption in something outside the frame of the picture. Clara. She looked away before he could catch her looking. He poured water from a glass pitcher on the credenza, 2 glasses without asking, and set one in front of her and stood at the window with the other and said, Tell me, she told him. Everything she'd observed in the order she'd observed it, the side door propped open, the voices, the folder, the man's posture when he'd leaned over the desk, the name he'd left. Dorian listened without interrupting, without moving. He had the rare quality of stillness that makes a person feel genuinely heard, which she suspected was not unconnected to the quality that made people afraid of him. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Renner works for a company that wants access to something in this building, he said, not to her exactly. Processing aloud, she understood, which meant he trusted her with the shape of the thing, even if not with the details. He's been trying to get it through legitimate channels for 6 weeks. Tonight he tried a different approach. The desk. A pause. He won't try it again. She believed him. Not because he said it with threat, he didn't. Because he said it with the flat certainty of a man describing something that has already been decided rather than something that might happen. Lily, he said then, changing direction entirely. The way conversations change when the person steering them decides the practical part is finished. How was the first appointment? Mara looked at him. She said the equipment smelled like a swimming pool. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. And you. I drank bad coffee and didn't read a magazine. But, she looked at him. But it's going to be all right, she said. I think, for the first time in 11 months, I think it actually might be. He looked at her for a long moment. Good, he said, quietly. The word carrying more weight than its single syllable should have been able to hold. She finished the water. She stood. She picked up her bag. Mara, he said. She stopped. Don't walk past the building, he said. If you're passing, come in. She stood in the middle of his office for a moment, with the city behind him and the photograph on the shelf, and the particular silence of a room that has held grief for a long time and is slowly, cautiously, learning to hold something else. Good night, Dorian Ashe, she said. He almost smiled. She left before she could see whether he did. The thing about windows, Mara had learned, was that they didn't announce themselves. You didn't feel them opening. You only felt a difference in the air afterward, a shift in temperature, a change in pressure, the subtle alteration of a room that has been closed for a long time and is now incrementally not. You noticed it after. When something that had been held tight in your chest for so long it had become structural was suddenly, quietly less tight. And you stood in your own kitchen on a Tuesday morning with the kettle boiling and realized that you had not, for the first time in 11 months, woken up already bracing. Lily's second appointment went well. Her third went better. The specialist used the word responding, which was a clinical word and therefore careful. But Mara had been navigating clinical language long enough to know that responding was good. That responding was the word they used when they meant the window is working, when they meant you got here in time. She did not cry in the waiting room. She cried in the stairwell on the way out, briefly and efficiently, facing the wall, while Lily waited on the landing below with the diplomatic patience of a child pretending not to hear. Then Lily called up, "Are you done?" And Mara said, "Yes." And they went for egg sandwiches. She went to the building on Aldgate Street on a Friday evening, 3 weeks after the night she'd seen Renner. Not passing this time, not accidentally. She went because Dorian had called, not her mobile, her work number at St. Anselm's, which meant he had looked it up, which meant he had chosen the formality of it deliberately, and said that Felix had found something in the 38th floor records that she should probably know about, that it concerned Dr. Solis, that it could potentially concern Lily. She had gone immediately. What Felix had found was not dramatic in its appearance. It was a secondary file, cross-reference to Lily's original assessment, containing a note from Solis that had never been included in the formal record, a note that suggested the qualification notation. The 3 lines Mara had needed, the 3 lines that had been misfiled in Dorian's cabinet, had not been misfiled accidentally. Someone had moved it, not Solis. Someone with access to Solis's outgoing files in the 2 weeks before she transferred practices. Someone who had known what the notation meant for the assistance application and had calculated correctly that without it the application would stall long enough for the window to narrow past usefulness. Mara sat with this information in Dorian's office for a long time without speaking. Lily was not with her. For the first time, she had come to this building without Lily, who was at a neighbor's for the evening, and the absence of her felt strange, like arriving somewhere familiar and finding a piece of furniture moved, the shape of the space altered by one small displacement. "Who?" she said finally. "Someone Solis owed a favor to," Dorian said. He was at the window. He stood at the window often, she had noticed. Not looking out exactly. More the way people stand near light when they need to think. Someone who had an interest in your sister's treatment being delayed. That doesn't make sense. No one has an interest in Lily. She's 7 years old. She's nobody. She's not nobody. He turned from the window. Her father is. Mara went very still. Lily's father, Dorian said carefully, has been trying to establish a legal claim. Not to Lily, to your mother's estate, such as it was. A property, a small one, but in an area that's been rezoned. Worth considerably more now than it was when your mother acquired it. Mara stared at him. A successful assistance application would have required a full legal review of Lily's guardianship status, he continued, which would have surfaced the paternity question, which would have complicated his claim considerably. He delayed her treatment, Mara said. The words came out very flat, very even. In the register she used when she was holding something that wanted to be a different feeling and was being firmly declined. To protect a property claim, he delayed a sick child's treatment. Yes. The silence was enormous. Mara looked at her hands on the desk in front of her. They were completely still. This surprised her, distantly, because the rest of her did not feel still at all. The rest of her felt like something tectonic, like a shift that had been building for a long time beneath the surface that had held itself level by will alone. "What happens to him?" she said. Dorian looked at her for a moment. "That depends on what you want." "I want Lily safe. I want the treatment uninterrupted. I want the guardianship uncontested." She paused. "And I want him to understand that he made a significant mistake." Something settled in Dorian's expression. Quiet, certain. "All of those things," he said, "are already being arranged." She looked at him. "You started before I got here. I started when Felix found the file. You didn't ask me. I'm telling you now." She held his gaze. There was a version of this conversation where she objected, or where she said that she didn't want his interference, that she could manage, that the appropriate channels existed for reasons and she intended to use them. She knew this version. She had rehearsed it slightly. On the way over, in the habitual way she rehearsed the assertive responses she often failed to deliver. She didn't deliver it now either, but for a different reason than habit. She didn't deliver it because she looked at him across the desk, at the man who had stood in a doorway 41 floors above the city, and looked at her sister with a grief so old it had become part of his face, who had found a document in an evening that 9 days of procedure had failed to find, who had called her work number rather than her mobile because he understood, without being told, that she needed to be approached carefully. And she understood that he had not acted without her. He had acted ahead of her, which was different. He had seen what was needed and moved toward it before she arrived, not instead of her, but for her. In the way that people act for other people when they have decided quietly and without announcement that those people matter. She didn't know when she had decided he mattered in return. She suspected it had happened in increments, the way most true things happen. Not a moment, an accumulation of moments. The water glass set down without asking, the almost smile at the corner of his mouth. The way he said her name, both of them, always both, Mara Voss, as though the full name was the thing he wanted, not the abbreviated version people use when they've stopped paying attention. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded. Once, she looked at the shelf, at the photograph. Clara with her dark hair and her absorbed expression, and the thing outside the frame that had captured her entirely. "She looks like you," Mara said. Around the eyes. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes." Lily said she would have liked her. Mara paused. "I think she was right. I think they would have been—" She stopped. The word she was reaching for was complicated. Not friends exactly. Something more specific than that. The kind of like-minded that doesn't need proximity to function, that recognizes itself across a room the way Lily had recognized something in Dorian the moment she walked through the door, unafraid, and told him that nobody had given him permission to have all this space either. "Formidable," Dorian said quietly. Mara looked at him. "Together," he said. "They would have been formidable." She felt something move through her. Not grief, not hers to grieve, something adjacent to it. The particular ache of imagining a world that didn't happen and knowing that the imagining is the closest you'll get to it. "Yes," she said, "they would have." They sat with that for a moment. The city below, indifferent and luminous, the photograph on the shelf. The space between them that had been over the course of 5 weeks and 3 unexpected visits, gradually and without either of them formally acknowledging it, becoming something other than distance. Felix knocked and entered. He always knocked. With a thin folder of documents that he placed on the desk with his habitual reverence and then retreated from with his habitual tact. Dorian opened the folder. Inside were 3 documents. He turned them toward Mara. The first was a legal notice. She read it twice. It confirmed that the paternity claim against her mother's estate had been formally withdrawn, effective that morning. The second was a letter from the assistance program confirming Lily's continued enrollment, uncontested, for the full duration of the treatment plan. The third was shorter than the others. It was a single paragraph on plain paper, no letterhead, and it said, in plain, unambiguous language, that the person who had moved Lily's qualification notation from Solis's outgoing files had resigned from their position at the clinic that afternoon, voluntarily, with no intention of working in medical administration again. Mara read all 3 documents. She looked up. "How?" she said. "Carefully," he said. She almost laughed. It surprised her, the almost laugh, the way it arrived without warning in a moment she had not expected to contain anything light. She pressed her lips together. He watched her do it with that expression she had finally named weeks ago and had not stopped thinking about since. Not quite a smile, not a smile. "Lily is going to want to know all of this," Mara said. "I know. She'll have questions, specific ones. She'll want to understand the mechanism of all of it, how you found it, what you did, in what order." "I'll answer them." Mara looked at him. "You say that like you've met her." "I have met her." he said. She told me that nobody gave me permission to have all this space and that furniture can still hurt you if you walk into it. A pause. I feel reasonably prepared. This time she did laugh. Briefly, quietly, in the way she laughed when something caught her genuinely off guard, without performance, without self-consciousness, just a plain involuntary sound of a person who has been surprised into lightness. It was the first time she had laughed in this office. She thought, from the way he looked at her when it happened, that he had been aware of this. She gathered the documents, folded them with the same care she had folded everything that mattered in the past weeks. The careful fold of someone who has learned not to take the arrival of important paper for granted. She put them in her bag. She stood. He stood. I'd like to bring Lily, she said. Next time, if that's... She paused. The sentence didn't have a clean ending. She wasn't sure what she was asking permission for exactly. To come back, to keep coming back, to let the thing that had been shifting slowly beneath the surface of these weeks continue shifting without either of them pretending not to feel it. Next Friday, he said. There's a place on the ground floor that does decent coffee, better than hospital coffee. That's a low bar. She can have a hot chocolate. Mara looked at him for a moment. At the window behind him, the city arranged in cold geometric order 40 floors below. At the photograph on the shelf, third from the left, facing the chair, not the door. She'll want to sit in the good chair, she said. There are 2 good chairs. She'll want both. Something moved through his expression, layered, complex, belonging to more than one feeling at once. She recognized it now. She had learned to read the small vocabulary of his face over 5 weeks and 3 visits. This one she had seen only once before. In the doorway, the first night, when he had looked at Lily, and something that had been taught for a very long time had involuntarily released. It was a man remembering how to make room. Both chairs, he said. Fine. She moved toward the door, stopped at the threshold, and she always stopped at the threshold, she realized, every time, as though the leaving required one more moment than the arriving, as though there was always one more thing the room needed before it would let her go. She turned back. Dorian, she said. He looked at her. She's going to be all right, she said. Not Lily this time, both of them. All 3 of them, perhaps, in the particular way that broken things can be all right, not restored to what they were, which was never the point, but reorganized around what remains, around what was missed and what was found and what walked through the wrong door on a Wednesday evening and refused, with absolute serenity, to be afraid. He held her gaze. Yes, he said, quietly, with the certainty of a man who has learned the cost of windows and has decided this time not to miss one. She left. Outside, the October city was cold and bright, and she walked through it with her bag on her shoulder and 3 folded documents against her ribs, and the feeling, careful, unfamiliar, real, that the ground beneath her feet had stopped shifting. Not because it had become solid again, because she had. Some stories find you at exactly the right moment. If this was one of them, you know where to come back.